Victory is all you need, so cultivate and plant the seed. Hold your breath and count to 10. Just count to 10. I'm gonna make you wait, so ring the bell. I know it all too well. Switch blade on the edge of your wrist. Can you witness? Your sanity brings no reward for one more hit and one last score. Don't be a casualty of the card. Don't be a casualty of the card.
If we ever met, we'd totally become best friends. And as soon to be besties, I guess you're already wondering what I'm gonna get you this year. Well, we just met, so I got you this cute decanter. I'm surprised when you opened it.
Okay, we get a handout. I wanted to make sure you guys had that. This is
one time, I mean, you ever see everything? Yeah. It would always be like the same set, you know, that it's not weird. It's hard. You can't just take it apart, but it's like,
I didn't know it was a back. He acted like I heard her.
okay, so with that, everyone should have a handout. There's going to be a big phase change in the content of the course, which is a great time to have an exam. So from here forward, we were talking really about, quite frankly, a lot of more of the how bio interfaces to engineering. A lot of the rest of the course is going to be about engineering, and then bio has to take it back to you. With that in mind, there's a handout that's on the bioreactor design. This is actually was a refab of this particular mirror material for what because I used to be teaching essentially all ChE 340, and then I knew everyone who was in this class would be in that, and so this was a prelude lecture out of ChE 340 to cover the concept of reactor design. And so, with that in mind, second is I want to schedule an exam. So I can do that as soon or not soon as you would generally like, although it has to be before the class is over. Okay. I'd like to have it, well, within the next 2 weeks. Basic idea is if it goes well, then we don't need another one. We can just have a final. If it doesn't go quite so well, we'll maybe throw another one in there to give you an additional opportunity. And then have a comprehensive. Thoughts on exams? Anyone want to throw out there? If I were to throw out a day on Thursday evening, that way you can go out versus Thursday afterwards. That's kind of not a bad option historically. Anyone have a problem with this particular Thursday or the next Thursday? I really don't care. We'll be on stuff preceding this anyway. Give you a chance to. No, just don't want to take an exam at all. Got that. Have to have one. Next Thursday. Not this Thursday, but the next Thursday. Okay. Anyone have? If there's an issue with that, that's here. Where's our runner? She's not here yet. Okay. We'll see if she will. Here. Where the exam is on. We'll work that out. Okay. That will be the date. Does anyone know what date that is? 25th. Okay, so there you go. 25th. I will find a location and try to find one where it's easy to kind of spread out and have it in the evening. The format of the exam is as typically, it's not a race. In theory, I say you can stay as long as you want.
And practice.
Midnight, I start to play music, and then 1 o'clock I start to sing. So, that will usually take care of any residual people who want to hang around. So that'll be the tentative plan for this, and we'll jump right in. For those who didn't get the handout or the after, no, actually, I actually figured this out on Canvas myself. Kind of. Has anyone tried to click to see if you actually have access to the movies? It works, okay. They're not actually on, they're not YouTube videos or anything. They're videos I had taken a couple years ago, back in the Penske pilot thing. And I go on to the shindig that we did this last time. Your job, Cassandra, is to randomly divide this crew into roughly 5 groups. And I like random because you have to meet somebody other than the person sitting next to you. Idea is to try to get small groups, and then we'll schedule a chance to go into the facility and actually kind of go over the skid, really close up and personal, all the wires, follow the piping, and so forth, so you can get a good idea of what it is. The basic assignment is to sketch things out, like sketch out the temperature proposals and all the elements of that to get contact on. So we'll try to coordinate that with the facility. Not so easy. I used to be the director of it, so I sat down there with my laptop and people come in with everything in the next 2 days kind of thing. We'll have to coordinate it a little better this time for that kind of thing. So at any rate, kind of be aware that we'll try to do that as soon as we can. It's convenient right now because they're not really that operational. And then have to be worried about closed-toed shoes, long pants, safety glasses, all that. Probably should have had that last time. So, with that being said, I want to jump into the stirred tank design. This is sort of condensation material that is evolved from an original industrial workshop programs we ran starting about 1995. We actually had these four-day industrial workshops. People come back from industry, and we were teaching stuff that they apparently weren't taught in classes. And I taught that to roughly 2,000 people in the industry of fermentation technology. So this was the lectures related to stirred tank design that came out of that sort of bits and pieces. It started on overhead and morphed over into slides at some point. You'll notice there are elements of this that relate to the structure of what I would teach in Chemie 340, so that if you see something that looks a little confusing, I'll constantly be referring to the major case studies that we had in 340, which included insulin production, EPO is erythropoietin. Well, insulin was the first biotech product, in a sense. Take a gene, take a human gene, stick it in E. coli, make human insulin. EPO was the first mammalian cell-based system. So that's sort of the predecessor to modern industry of tone, Chinese hamster ovary, and so forth. I do sometimes also may refer to antibiotic production, and certainly HFCS, high fructose corn syrup. Mainly because it is, well, the source of the diseases for insulin and everything else, and it's a really cool enzymatic-based process. So if you see those references, it's well, it's sort of a residual of where this had evolved over time, so don't get excited about that. So that's what I mean by high fructose corn syrup, insulin, EPO, case studies. Just to emphasize then the concept of stirred tanks, I refer to it as unquestionably the most important chemie unit operation. People would say, oh, it's just like, that's just one of them. You distilling a whole lot of oil and so forth. But unit ops, you will not be in any facility besides maybe a drilling tank where everything has been so retrofitted, continuous, and for the most part has even accounted for that. But everywhere else in the world you find that. I note that it's one of the most neglected unit operations. In fact, it's not even in the books like that are called unit operations, UK and Smith. And partially because there's entire books dedicated to stirred tank and so forth. It's just isn't there. The math isn't pretty, so you're not going to typically see too much of it in your fluids course. When I'm breaking it down to your motion, you want to make sure that you understand why it isn't there. And the goal today has complicated geometry and behavior, but that doesn't stop us from designing them. Okay, it just means that instead of having a lot of mathematics and so forth, you do it based on semi-empirical correlations and so forth. The final point here is that, of course, stirred tanks are used in every industry, not just biotech. And so there are special considerations when you have something that's alive in it. That would not be the case if it was not. We talk an awful lot, this would be a recurring focus, and that is, remember the mass transfer coefficients. This is gas liquid interfacial mass transfer, getting essentially oxygen into the system or getting CO2 in if it has to be synthetic. And so that's a major focus of the biofield. Concepts of mixing that are in here, because there's always three phases. There's always going to be a liquid, there's going to be a solid, this cell is going to be there, and ultimately there's going to be a gas. So there's a tendency when we get sort of first principles based courses to there we go. Well, what do we do here in chemie usually? Assume it's perfectly mixed, or assume it's not mixed at all. There's something in between there. Depends on how much time I'll spend on that aspect of it. Concepts are related to coalescence and breakup and so forth. Not relationships, but we're talking about gases and liquids, or liquids and immiscible liquids and so forth. They have a lot to do with things like surface tension. You know, I tell people that if there's a problem and you can't figure it out, it's probably surface tension. Okay? And we teach you essentially nothing about it. Okay? And so some aspects of flow versus mixing, which are two actually competing phenomena, which actually become apparent. This is the cousin of the reactor that we were crawling around on Friday. This is actually a mammalian cell type reactor. This is the kind of reactor that you grow chili in, and this is the kind of reactor that you would Let's see, I'm looking for my toys. Oh, there we go. Okay, we'll hand those around here in a minute when we start talking about impeller design. These are fundamentally, they're operated fundamentally differently in terms of control. Their aspect ratios are different. Essentially, a huge amount of aspects of how they are run and how they are designed are different, but they kind of look the same. Big stainless steel thingy with a whole lot of pipes and stuff around it. And so understanding the difference between that, this happens to be the one that the competitor of that one that I had worked on and developed. This is Crash Bank, which is the antithesis of that. And this is actually really kind of a cool online monitoring-based system here, where it's flowing through an actual optical cell. That optical cell measures light scattering, how much it's growing and so forth continuously. Just some things like that. We touched on that one, that actual flow cell, if you look back in the road back slides. So when we get into the the basic concept here, this is a slide that I won't spend too much on because it is building on what had already been taught in high fructose corn syrup. High fructose corn syrup is where you take the corn. We talked about it here. First thing you do is you hydrolyze the starch, the sugars. That's kind of easy. You just get the amylases. The amylases will take care of that. That's all done in stirred tank systems. You literally throw in the enzymes. The enzymes go ahead, break that down. You then pass that through a reactor, an immobilized enzyme reactor that actually then converts the glucose to fructose with an isomerase, and that's why it's called high fructose corn syrup. If you simply took starch and hydrolyzed it, you would have all glucose. Not as sweet per unit calorie, and so we actually then run it through an enzyme-based reactor for that. So in that particular one, there's obvious insulin and EPO are both the two competing concepts of reactors, one being an E. coli reactor, very hard to kill them, you can turn them to really high RPM and so forth. And the EPO is actually a mammalian cell line, where the entire design and operation is based on that. They're all stirred tank systems, but they're inherently different. And hopefully by the next lecture or two, you'll start to get to some of the concepts here. Now I mentioned the math is not pretty, and it's because you don't have a pipe, for example. You can't simply do the little equations, continuity of motion, momentum balance, get the end result, which I always find amusing in part because, by the way, the only, if I asked you what does the velocity profile look inside a pipe, since you came late, what does it look like? Yeah, it's like a U thingy, right? Okay. Here's the irony of this answer. Unless you know that answer, you can't get that answer. You kind of fool yourself into thinking you did, but you have to know that there's symmetry. You have to know that the shear stress is zero at the middle, meaning you have to know the velocity profile goes to a maximum in the middle, or you can't actually solve this velocity profile. So it felt all warm and fuzzy inside, but the reality is that you couldn't get that answer unless you knew the answer in the first place. Okay, and that's inherently true of a lot of the aspects of when you solve some of these problems. Is that you didn't discover that in fact that was there. You used the mathematical constraint of it having to have the maximum velocity and zero shear in the middle to get the actual velocity profile. Okay. That is not going to happen here for two reasons. Number one, it's not laminar. Number two, it's not a simple geometry like a pipe either. And so if you take a look at how information is usually presented in a useful form, they need a reference geometry. They need to say something like, if I put a typical impeller in a typical tank with a typical baffling with a typical aspect ratio, how does it perform? Mass transfer. And then everything changes from there. So what if I put in two impellers? What if I make it tall and skinny? What if I take out some of the baffling? Okay? And so everything sort of makes its way back to a bit of a reference in order to do that. And this is the reference geometry. The reference geometry is the tank is as wide as it is tall. The baffles are 1/12 of the diameter of the tank. There are 4 of them. Why 4? Because 1 does a huge amount, 2 does a little bit, 3 does a little bit more, and after you get to 4, any additional baffling put in there doesn't do you any good in a correlation with the amount of mixing, mass transfer, so on and so forth. And so these all sound kind of arbitrary. Yes, they are. We needed an arbitrary reference. The impeller is 1/3 of the diameter here, and there's 1 diameter off the bottom. There you go. That's the reference thing. And then you can ask yourself things like, what would happen if I put the impeller closer to the bottom? What would happen if I change the impeller? Things like that. So get used to the basic idea here that there's not going to be any sort of magical mathematics to fall back on. You're going to be falling back on experimental observation and variations and so forth as well. So that being sort of the tank diameter. So question, how much power can you put in? Okay, and so for those of you that now the horsepower in our Prius is not so impressive, okay, but it gets really good gas mileage. I used to get 4 miles to the gallon through my Challenger, but it could lift the wheels off, of course. Not exactly efficient, and here's the irony is that the performance of a mixed tank will always be better to put more power in. Not too surprising, right? It makes it harder, faster, stronger than that, and it makes it better, mass transfer is better, and all that kind of stuff. And so if I didn't have any biological constraint, my only constraint is that it not blow off. Okay. And if I was working with a non-biological system, that would be the answer. The answer would basically be crank in as much power per unit volume as you can. And when you have a reactor that is non-biological, that is the constraint. In fact, the impellers are designed specifically to deliver as much power as possible. Okay. That isn't actually obviously the case here because of this concept, which is ironically discussed as shear. In other words, I talk about shear stress on my organisms, that I don't want to shear them and hurt them. I think it's also another certain irony here that the shear, by its very definition, is a laminar curve. It's derivative of the velocity profile. This is shear, two things going against each other. This is looks like a velocity profile, right? Okay, and then you calculate the shear based on basically the slope of that line. That is shear. But the real concept in a third tank reactor, since it is not laminar, is actually turbulence. And we've already mentioned that thing about, remember, the Kolmogorov Eddy length, that smallest length scale at which you have things moving around and ultimately getting to the point where it is just a transition from flow to thermal energy. That is what turbulence is. And turbulence is what actually kills cells, not shear. Okay. And so, but it kind of feels like shear. It's easier to understand shear. Okay, like this. Okay, and so we'll talk quite a bit about the concept of turbulence once again, because when you took your fluid dynamics course, one of the very first things you assumed was laminar. The reason is the mathematics for momentum transfer, equation of continuity, all that assumed laminar. Okay. Is it a surprise to you that laminar is not a goal of engineering? It shouldn't. Okay. Because it sounds like stuff like, the stuff that's like the velocity profile, the zero boundary condition means the crap stuck on the impeller never leaves. Okay. The stuff going through the pipe doesn't mix at all. These all sound like bad things, and generally speaking, they are. Plus, laminar means slow. Slow is also, generally speaking, not good either. Okay, so why would you pump water through a pipe under laminar conditions? Because you don't care when it gets there. That would be the major reason one would do that. With that in mind, I throw this out. Now, I saw this. I thought, hey, what about that we had the super duper quick tour where Mark kind of like blew past all this equipment, and I was like going like, oh, I so wish I could give a lecture on every room that was in there and every piece of equipment that was that you guys saw. And this was a bead mill. Okay, so what exactly is a bead mill? A bead mill is literally, you know, you can kind of see those little impellers there. They don't look like very good impellers, do they? They look like they're quite thick. But they run at really high RPM. And still they will not break open bacteria cells or yeast cells at all. You ran them through there, they would not. So you can run this thing at 1,000 RPM, it's not going to break them at all. That's why it's called a bead mill. The bead mill is actually, okay, so if you search on Google on bead mill, you'll find there are two kinds of bead mills. Well, actually, you hardly find this one at all. Okay. What you find is the rock tumblers. Okay. So who in this room had a rock tumbler? I mean, come on, you know, it's not uncool to own a rock tumbler. It's cool to have a rock tumbler, and you know, and then you get the rocks, you throw in the little bit of the garnet and all that stuff. You guys, yes, no, yes, look at me like you have no idea what the hell I'm talking about. Okay, your childhoods were stolen from you. Okay, okay, by video games. Every kid in everyone had a rock tumbler. Okay, all it was a little plastic thing, and you stuck it onto a thing, and it rolled. And you put the rocks in there until they polished all kind of nifty cool, and that's what a rock tumbler was. Okay. Okay. I have to find my rock tumbler in the class. Okay. So, at any rate, you can kind of imagine you can polish and grind things up in a rock tumbler, and you put in some grinding medium, and they roll the barrel around, and it'll grind them up into pieces. That's not what we're talking about here. This is all fluidics. There is a container that goes around this thing. There's a constant flow in. That flow goes in, and this entire compartment is filled with tiny glass beads, teeny tiny little glass beads. It looks like sand. They're very precision glass beads. They're typically made out of Pyrex for a lot of reasons, for lack of attrition of silica, but mostly it's strong. Okay. And you would think that if you took glass beads and you ran this impeller at 1,000 RPM and tossed those little glass beads at each other, the beads would break themselves. Okay. But they don't. Okay. What it does do is it imparts a differential momentum. Okay. It's all turbulent and so forth. They would like to hit each other. Okay. And so they're, you know, although the liquid will squeeze out from between them, and it's just enough energy per unit volume so they don't quite hit each other as they go through there, and that creates essentially a localized energy dissipation rate that is high enough to get that eddy length down to a scale that will actually break open cells themselves. Okay. There's a frit on the backside so that the beads can't leave. They are stuck inside this thing, and you literally flow your system through essentially this sort of static thing here that's like beating up and breaking everything, and by the time it gets to the other side of the unit, they're broken open. That is how a bead mill works. And so you can kind of think about it as as getting squished between the two and in a local turbulence associated with two beads wanting, trying to hit each other, but they can't because of the lubrication, so to speak, of the fluid between them. So that's essentially how a bead mill works. Now, this is exactly the opposite of what you want in a fermenter. Okay? In a fermenter, this is all designed with the purpose of trying to break things open as opposed to not break things open, which is really what we call bioreactor design. When they first started to do work with mammalian cells, I think the way to think of this is that in the world of bacteria, they're little, they're tiny, and they're tough. Okay. They are bacteria. They have cell walls. You got the thing, and it's 5 microns or so forth here. Little tiny things. Hard to break that thing open. Okay. When you get on up to, say yeast and so forth, and they're going to look a lot bigger. And then by the time you get to a ChE cell, or Chinese hamster ovary cell, it's really big. It doesn't have a cell wall, And it wasn't intended to ever live as a suspended fluid cell. Okay? These grew up their entire life and evolution to be a free living bacterial cell. Yeast also has that advantage. By the time you get to something like a human cell, okay, you have literally coerced it to no longer behave like a mammalian cell. Tell it to grow free in suspension. It doesn't have the membrane. It has a membrane, but it doesn't have a cell wall. So you can imagine that when they first started to try to put those into reactors, they were like, "Oh, they're shear sensitive." You could grow them in very gentle shakers like this. You could put them into little flasks like that. And for the most part, most of them were not even happy unless they stuck to the flask itself. And I'll talk later about scaling and so forth. That was ultimately the changing of this industry. But you can kind of imagine if the cell will only grow to an attached surface, it's pretty hard to scale up. Okay. As they got to the point where they had attachment-independent cell lines, okay, they became, it's a selective process. It's kind of like ChE, right? Okay, so we start out with 500 freshmen that think they want to be ChEs, and by the time we get to this 10, there's nothing really left. Okay. They may come out a little unhappy, okay, but okay, they do make it out the other side. And the assumption is that, well, I mean, there's an impeller in there. You would assume that the impeller is what's making them unhappy. They're, it's us beating you up. Okay. And then someone was like, well, you know what if I actually increase the pressure in the headspace, increase the partial pressure, increase the mass transfer coefficient so I don't have to have bubbles in the system? And lo and behold, they're happy at the same RPM. And then they're like, wait a minute, okay, I thought it was the impeller that they were unhappy about, not the gas. Because gas bubbles are gentle. Okay? Gas bubbles are not particularly gentle, whereas gas bubbles are where cells start to attach to, and then the impeller trying to break apart the bubble. When it does, it can break apart the cell on that and so forth. There's a lot going on. If anybody's ever looked at their soda, or big lighting, okay, of a bar, okay, what you'll see is that when the bubbles pop, you see like little toruses. Big soda. The soda pop. And the soda pop actually comes to the surface and there's like little things. And they shoot like inches above the thing as the bubble breaks. You should see a high-speed camera of a little bubble racing on the surface. It's really cool. And they actually showed that behavior was in part, attached them, bring them to the surface, and then killed them. So interestingly enough, we'll talk more about sort of the gas-liquid interface problem more, but you can kind of get an idea then that it isn't just about the impeller. We'll talk more about the gas part of this thing. But I wanted to start this discussion by making sure you recognize that one of the important aspects of stir tank design for biological systems is that it's not just a single phase. Because you can kind of imagine that if you go look for a correlation of mixing or something like that, it'll be mixing in something that's a single phase, and they'll put like a dye in there, and they'll see how fast it takes to mix it up. Here you're going to have a cell, and then you're also going to have another gas phase. And in fact, I like to point out to people that if I have a bioreactor and the impeller stops, the mass transfer may go down, but it'll continue to grow. If I have a reactor and my gas stops, it all dies. So I like to think of a reactor as a gently stirred bubble column, okay, as opposed to a gas barge stirred tank. Because they're both important, and quite frankly, gas is more important, especially when you scale up. The interface on the top is really small. Okay. So looking again a little more at the idea between gas interaction, impellers, and so forth, let's say that I have no bubbles in the system. We'll talk about different designs of impellers, but the classic design of an impeller was called a Rushton impeller. I'm sorry, but someone stole my bigger one. Okay, I have bigger ones. I'll be handing these around. But the Rushton impeller it looks like a round thing like this. Okay, And when you look at it on its side, it looks like that, okay? And so what happens is the gas can't go up next to the shaft, it's got to go out where the tips are. And the tip is where the high shear is for breaking the bubbles. Rushton was actually a professor. In fact, he was a professor at Purdue, where I had done my PhD. I know that because his name was on the door next to where I was sitting. I think he died, I think, while I was there, but I didn't really see him. He did not do anything biological. Rushton his thing was strictly gas liquid reactors, two-phase reactors, two-phase. So you basically, this was designed to break things up. Okay. All about trying to maximize the amount of power that goes in there, make sure that the other phase gets forced out into the highest shear region and break it up, whether it be gas, whether it be two-phase immiscible liquids and so forth. The Rushton impeller is really good. So if I hardly have any power from the gas, what it does, if you can kind of imagine, is that it throws the liquid at the wall. Because it is essentially like this. If I was like this, I'd be throwing liquid at the wall, right? And so that is a radial flow impeller. Okay. It hits the wall, what's it going to do? It's going to have to, it'll go like this, and it'll go like that. Okay. So the flow patterns under those circumstances are just like they're sketched here. Now, as I start to put gas in there, okay, and in fact, the gas, the power from an impeller, I'll show you in a minute how you calculate it. It's pretty easy. RPM, and so on and so forth like that. And gas, it's also relatively easy to calculate because you guys know how to do isothermal gas expansion, more or less. Okay. It's always kind of tricky, PVB, DVP, and which one is the one, and it's worked out. But the reality is, it's worked out a little bit. You can figure out if I blew gas at the bottom of a column, and the column is this deep, but I know the hydrostatic head is from there to there. I know the pressure drop from the bottom to the top. I can calculate the amount of power that's delivered by that gas as it expands from the bottom of the liquid to the top. Okay. Trust me, you could do it. Or I'll show you. The rule of thumb in a bioreactor-based system is that if you were to make the gassing power is equal to it, which is about right for like a microbial fermentation, which is a lot of power. What happens is the gas starts to really affect the flow patterns. Not too surprising. The amount of power being delivered to the system is partially the whole impeller thing going on, and partially the gas thing going on. Now, to put that in context of what that represents, does anyone remember from the tour last time what I told you was the volume of gas per volume of liquid per minute? Are you the guy that works in? Okay, no, you're not. There you are. Okay. Yeah. So what is the gas flow rate? Right, 1 ppm, 1 volume of gas per volume of liquid per minute. Okay. So that is a typical operating gassing rate of a reactor. Which, when I have a 1 liter reactor, sounds like a fish aquarium. 1 liter of gas per minute. Okay. When I'm running my weightlifting buddy from Purdue, he went to Pfizer to run the 1,000,000 gallon penicillin fermentations. Okay. Million, who cares? You get to 1,000,000, a liter a gallon. It's a lot. Okay. Imagine what it's like to throw 1,000,000 liters per minute of gas into a reactor. Okay. It is basically a rocket engine strapped to the bottom of this thing. And so and it doesn't scale with volume either, so the amount of that energy is going into a smaller footprint as the actually gets larger surface volume or something. Okay. So you can kind of imagine then that the rough criterion of 1 ppm. When I get to the point where the power is greater than the impeller, then the impeller is just kind of like heating air. Okay. It can't keep up with it. The gas flow, the patterns of mixing and flow and everything in the reactor are actually dominated by the gas, not by the impeller. Okay. So sort of keep, this also, again, you can start to see where design and operation start to be sort of like these rules of thumb. Okay. where 1 ppm becomes the kind of like, oh yeah, we know 1 ppm. Why? Because you were told that. Okay? You are told run the reactor at some number. ppm is a nice, convenient number, volumes of gas per volume of liquid per minute, because, you know, I now have a 1,000-liter reactor instead of a 300, and I'm going to operate at 0.5 ppm. And so, what is my gas flow rate? Okay, just keeping you on your toes. A 1,000-liter reactor running 0.5 ppm gas flow. Yeah, 0.5 ppm. 500. Okay, it scales. Right now I have 1,000,000, so I have 0.5 ppm. 500,000. Yeah, we're getting there. Okay, but it's easy to scale. Now, is that like a there's also other little issues, like, because remember, it's a volume. It's a volume without even specifying pressure. So is it really a gas flow rate? What if I'm running at a head pressure of 10 psi, which is a little under an atmosphere, right? Where in the reactor is there actually a gas flow rate of 1 ppm? Nowhere. Because the volume of the gas is going to be compressed by virtue of the actual head pressure. The only place it would be running that is when it reaches out the exhaust. Okay. Okay. So these rules of thumbs get a little bit sketchy. Okay, but they're still useful. Okay. Yeah.
So the purpose of that number, is it defined as atmosphere pressure or not at all?
It depends on wherever you calibrated your piece of equipment, right? And of course, for me, yeah, I mean, that would be the standard that I would normally calibrate my piece of equipment, would be the standard temperature, atmosphere, 1 atmosphere.
So if you read BDN or paper or something like that, it might mean something different than what it's all.
It means it depends on how you trust what they came up with. Because even the way flow meters work, which I don't have time to teach you that either, is the flow meter, you know, the little ones with the little float run. What happens if I put a 10 psi back pressure on it? Is the same rating now going to be the same flow rate? You shake your head. The reality is that yes, because they actually designed them to be both a combination of a momentum effect and a skin friction effect, such that when the back pressure is there, you double the density of the gas, and then that density of the gas, even though it's a lower volumetric flow rate, will actually be impacting at a higher density. Okay. Yeah. Okay. So just be careful what you think you know. Okay, I guess is the point. It's because it's really easy to say 1 ppm and everybody goes away. Okay, like yeah, right, whatever. But it is really important. Why is it not? Well, it is important, but it's not. The answer to every question is always what on the end? You. Pay attention. Here. What is the answer to every question? Money. Thank you. Okay, so it's a money question, right? So the answer to the question is money. Now you only need to make a connection between money and the real answer that's going to give you credit. Okay, so why do we not care about the BPM? It's kind of it's air. Okay, it's air, you know, and what is the conversion of this air? Almost zero, right? Because you're putting it in at 20%, 21% oxygen in there, it's coming out at 20. So it's like the world's worst conversion, okay? And how much did you pay for that air? Well, kind of not much, because it was like there. Okay? I paid to compress it, and that should bother you a little bit, but not really, because I'm gonna rake people over some holes for my valuable drug anyway. Okay, and so I'm really gonna be worrying about the amount of was it plus or minus 25% the gas flow rate? No. Okay. No. But things are changing. Okay, the reality is that yes, as competition comes in, so on and so forth, it does become about the costs of production. Once you get past that initial phase of being able to be patented, to be able to assume that everybody has insurance, and everything else to take care of it. So, at any rate, I throw that out there in the big picture here. And I will come back around to that as we go, but I want to go back to the impeller. Okay, so I have a couple of these little guys to put them down here. There's another one. I'm going to keep this one here. It's a Rushton. Not too surprisingly, there are lots of different impeller designs. Okay, Rushton is the one that I mentioned. It's the little guy that's going around right now. And every imaginable permutation on those. Pitch blade, used a lot in the wastewater treatment area, in part because it's pretty good at shedding crap. And I don't mean by crap, I mean like rags and stuff like that. They don't tend to get wound up on it because it tends to push things. But note, the flow pattern from something like this is going to be very, very different. This one's clearly thrown at the wall, right? Okay. One that's in a pitch blade is kind of like it. If you put it on a boat, it might go. You put that on a boat, what happens? Nothing unless you turn it sideways. We call it a paddle wheel. Okay, so then you might get somewhere. But inherently, this one here is going nowhere. You throw that one on a boat, you might get somewhere, but it's not good. You can kind of imagine the whole problem with cavitation. You look at that and so forth. Marine impeller is designed for your boat to go somewhere. Okay. And this one is clearly pushing this way. It is inherently an axial flow impeller. It is pushing liquid as much as it can in the axial direction. This one's pushing as much in the radial direction. Very, very different. Okay. And different things. Who do you think designed this one? Yeah, who designed it? Just part of the world. Yeah, sure. Of course, they did design everything better than anyone else. Okay. It's kind of a cool concept, actually. It does have upflow here. This is all about busting stuff up. Okay? Remember that the speed with which it is going to be dependent on how far you are away from the center of rotation, right? And so you kind of imagine that on one can, having things way out there is good, and the other makes it really hard to turn. It dissipates a lot of energy. You put your hands out, you go in the pool, and you go like this. Put them out there like that. Yeah, not quite so easy. Big hands, like Phelps. Okay. Really hard to turn unless you're actually using them as paddles. My brother was a really good swimmer. This guy was and me, I just like. Okay. So hydrofoil. What's it? Remember, it's not all about just what the liquid's doing. It's about what the gas is doing. And one of the inherent problems of these things is that you're going to be throwing a lot of gas at this thing. And it has to accomplish the mixing of the liquid phase while at the same time dealing with the fact that there's a boatload of gas inside there that's trying to be moved around as well. So hydrofoil is actually designed in part to achieve decent mixing and decent breakup of gas bubbles and so forth. So that's used as well. Now, if I take a look at, this is actually a real world problem, okay? Years ago, I was kind of interested. This paper came out and they were like, do I want to push down with the impeller or do I want to push up with the impeller? It's still not clear what the answer to this is, but inherently, if I were to take, this is an impeller that came with a one of the little baby and you can kind of see that if I turn it in this direction, right? I'm not sure if you guys, where's the, someone can throw that. So this one, you can kind of see that if I were to take this and if I was to turn it in this direction, okay, it's going to push the liquid down. And so this is the kind of impeller that's in the ChE reactor that was not in the facility over there. That was a microbial one. I have that one out at the corner of the glass plant. It has an impeller like this. They cost $6,000. because the original design of these things was all about being very polished and smooth, so you didn't have turbulence and so forth on them. And so companies like ABEC, which is near Allentown, PA, actually do a lot of the manufacture of skids for mammalian cell reactors for around the world. So any of you all know where Allentown kind of sort of is. Pennsylvania is actually one of the sites of the manufacture of these. And they actually have the ability to put a mirror polish on that yes, you could like put on your makeup with that impeller. Fortunately, the guy that was in charge of some of that manufacturing, son came to Penn State, and so I got the impeller for free. Okay. But just the impeller itself was designed. Now I was asked the basic question, I'm like, well, if I'm going to do this, why don't I see what will happen to the mass transfer? Last time we talked about how to measure mass transfer. Right? There was the unsteady state method, there was the steady state method, showing the sulfide oxidation, KLA, and so forth. And so I could do a measurement of the actual consumption, or the mass transfer rates of oxygen in that reactor. And I wanted to know whether or not it would do better if I did instead of down pumping, did up pumping. What is the engineer's solution to making this thing go up pumping? What's that? Make the engine go the other way. Okay, what? Okay, we'll get to the current plug one. What's another way of thinking about it?
I guess you could.
Yeah, he's like going like, what if I was to turn it upside down? Going, right? Then I would take it like this, and then, okay, it's still going the same way, right? So that doesn't solve the problem, okay? The other one would be his solution. Let's just change the polarity of my electricity. You grew up on a farm? Yeah, you just learn all this crap by hanging out in a real world. You actually know, here, I have an exercise, by the way. So, I'll give you a fork. And if you want to increase your grade, you just have to stick it in the electrical arc. Okay. What are your chances of electrocuting yourself? No. You just get a fork, and you get to stick it into one hole. Plastic fork? No. I give you a screwdriver, uninsulated. What is the probability of you electrocuting yourself? What? No. Okay, it's only 1 in 3. There's only electricity on one of those legs. Right? One is the power coming in, and the other is the power going back. Okay. That's how electricity works. Okay, there's only one leg that is hot. It's the black wire when you get inside. Okay. At any rate, other stuff of life that you've missed while playing Nintendo, and so forth. So they're that hot. So if you want to change the polarity, all you do is you change the wire direction, and the wire will come out the other electrical one and go back the other way. Okay, so that's how on a piece of equipment. You can change the polarity on many pieces of equipment, such as charging your phone. Does it matter whether you plug it in this way or that way? Doesn't. There are some where it does matter. What do? They make one bigger than the other, right? So you can't put it in the wrong way. You can't change the polarity. That's why it's designed that way. Okay. Now, what does the third one do? That's just ground. Does electricity ever go through that? Not supposed to. It's called ground fault. It's why the metal case is all the wires are on there. If something very terrible happens and electricity does not go back the white wire that it's supposed to, it goes back the other one, the ground, and that's called a ground fault. Okay, and that's why you put ground faults in your sink and everything else like that. It's actually a little electronic comparator. That electronic comparator is seeing to make sure that all the electricity going out here is coming back the other side. If it doesn't, what does that mean? It's electrocuting you, and it shuts down the circuit, unless it's a hairdryer, because there's inductive. I mean, inductive actually accumulates the current, and then that's why your hairdryer can trip the ground fault because of this inductive flux. Okay, that all being said, so on the big reactor, went ahead. I thought I'm smart. Okay, I'm going to change the polarity. And then what I find out is that the actual sensor that was looking for this was an optical sensor that was running a laser beam off and looking for it over there. If I turn in the other direction, it doesn't see it. It immediately goes to 1,000 RPM, no matter what you're setting it. Okay. So some aspect of design and so forth is not as trivial as you might seem, and certainly with a variable frequency drive, it's even more complicated because it's not all about the juice coming in this way and that way. It's all about the frequency that you're modulating that runs those. For those of you that remember the talk I gave you about the VFDs. So all of you should know PIDs, VFDs, variable frequency drives, are the high efficiency versions that you'll see on Okay, so at any rate, time. How are we going? It was 27. It's time for you guys to go. We'll talk a lot more about design and power numbers and turbulence and mixing and coalescence and breakup in the next few weeks. So bring your engineering brains with you.
What if you don't have one of them?
If you don't have one of those, then go on eBay and see if there's one available. Does anyone live in Belfont? Because I have like a thing you can stick on your window, and like, it's, if you're on a jury, it's kind of like. I think I've been developing it back 30 years. Not a whole lot.